recruiting rankings are a sham. And I don't. And here's the thing, okay? I do want to make the distinction between rankings and ratings. I think ratings are okay, right? Like if you rate a guy, okay, when we have a conversation about a prospect, right? And Matt will say like, "Hey, what do you think of X guy?" And I'll look and I'll say, "Jamie, what do you think? Like 92?" Or like something like that. Because like then you're saying this guy, I don't know how he relates to like another person or this person or that person, like ranking them. But in terms of like, yeah, he's a 92 type player. Like that's okay. In my opinion, that's fine. But like when you get into rankings and stuff, like we talked about before, after you get out of like the top guys, the difference between like the 100th guy and the 200th guy and the 250th guy and the 300th guy, like
it's very negligible.
It's so marginal. And what matters, the only thing that really matters is what can the player do and how does that fit with the team that he's going to go to. For example, like Teddy Rizak is a perfect example of this, in my opinion. Like he's ranked low, right? No one really knows what his position is, but like there are things he could do. He can run. He is long. He is very similar to Marist in this way. Like he can run. He is long. He's athletic. He has position versatility, and you can put him in all different sorts of situations, right? Well, Notre Dame knows how to use guys like this. Okay, so his value to Notre Dame is different than his value to, say, Nebraska, just his home state school, right? Like so where he's ranked is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Even his offers are kind of irrelevant. Doesn't really matter. Notre Dame knows how to use a guy like this. He can run. He has all of the traits that Notre Dame wants in his position. So his ranking is not really important. It's not something that people should really talk about. And it's like this kind of across the board with like a number of prospects, right? And so like to me, it's like, and look, I make the mistake too. I talk about rankings too much. Like if the ranking is good, I'll say top 100 caliber guy. Like I did it all last show talking about like Josh Burnham and Jalen Sneed and Junior Tulihalamaka, right? I was like, oh, they were all top 100 caliber guys. Well, what does that mean really, right? They can do what they can do. And how does that project into Notre Dame's defense? And so like that's how we should evaluate players, much more so than, hey, this guy is ranked 88th. And he is so much better and more valuable than the guy who was ranked, 288th.
Yeah.
Like Bryce Young is no different as a prospect today than he was 6 months ago when he was ranked much lower, right? Same thing with Kedron Young. Those guys, when you see
the film of the senior year, like
you have the film, but it shows what it shows, right? Like, hey, these guys, like, they're really good. Like they can still do what they can do, right? Bryce Young, tall, long, explosive, has all those things you want to see. You're still projecting, right? So it's like they're still the same players, and so it's just like we really got to get away from that stuff. What can they do? What can they do, and how does that project to the team that they're going to?
Well, okay, I agree with you to a certain respect, and it's funny because Tyler except the
ISD Fab 50.
Yeah.
But I even have a caveat to that. I'll let you go, and then I'll give you a
well, I would say even too, one of the things with the Fab 50 that I do always mention is that the difference, I always mention that there's guys who were like didn't make it that are in the same tier as the guys that are in it. So it doesn't really matter that they're not in it, mm-hmm. And or the fact that, I think we talked about it here, maybe not or whatever, or maybe someone asked me on the board for ISD, but like how Cam Williams dropped to 80, whatever for 24/7 or whatever it was. Right. I'm like, who cares? He's this, like you said, he's the same prospect. And also, too, the difference between him being the 8th best receiver and the 13th, it's extremely negligible. Like, it's just like, it doesn't really matter. It's like, I always think of guys, it's like, put it this way. no one has, like, teams have their board, like programs have their board of guys that they like and whatever, and different programs, they have grades, right? They give grades out and they grade different ways. But I know, like, definitely that certain programs will have like tiers of, like, this guy is like someone we think is going to be a first round, tier 1, whatever, or like tier A or whatever, first round potential, blah blah blah, whatever. Another thing, multi-year starter, like, and they have these different kind of things, and they put guys in tiers, right? And that's how they do it. And really, all rankings are in this, and really kind of the stuff for, like, as it's NFL draft time, the same thing too with like mock drafts and all that too. It really doesn't mean that much, because it's like one of those things where if the quarterback gets drafted into a bad situation, and it's like Bryce Young, for example, he got drafted into a much worse situation than CJ Stroud. And I'm not saying that CJ Stroud isn't better or going to be better, and maybe they made the wrong pick. Maybe they did, right? But like, if Bryce Young got put on the Texans, I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, but I guarantee you he is going to look way better than he did for the Carolina Panthers this year, right? So all of that kind of stuff plays into the equation, and it's like everybody's always a believer in their own ability, and I get it, right? It's like part of what makes players great is that you have to have this kind of self-confidence and think like, I can do this, or I can be this, and I can do this anywhere. But to me, like, if I'm saying, for example, tight ends, you're an insane person as a tight end if you're not being like, well, I want to go to Iowa, Notre Dame, or wherever. You just are, because some teams use the tight end. Some teams teach guys how to block. Some guys feature the tight end and make that a big deal as part of their offense. And 90% of the other teams don't care, or you're just a big slot, and why don't these tight ends think about that? Like, I don't ever get it. Like, I just don't understand it. So, like, if I look at, say, Georgia, obviously, I mean, they like to play with multiple tight ends and use them. And look how Brock Bowers was used. Like, that's great. But there's just other teams. It's just like, it doesn't even matter that some of these guys are super talented or whatever. They just get stuck and they're just like useless. And I don't even think, and I'm like, some of these guys could have been studs if they went to the right school, but they chose whatever because, I mean, I'm not saying you should only choose because of what you think, is the best for your NFL future. There's a lot of other stuff that goes to it. You want to be happy. You want to be in the sun, or whatever, right? Whatever you want to look at. But there's a lot of reasons why guys don't end up being great and whatever. So, like, I don't know that, like, say, Carter Nelson, for example. I don't know that Carter Nelson might not just be this absolute phenom at, he's a freak athlete. The guy played 8-man football, for people who don't know. He signed with Nebraska. Notre Dame was, very interested in him, wanted to still add him to the class, but he was going to stick with Nebraska. And that's fine. But I mean, and I, truth be told, I don't know enough about, Nebraska's offensive philosophy and what their, Matt Rule's track record with tight ends or whatever, right? Yeah. I don't know enough about that. Maybe he just hasn't had the right tight end to do that. But I do think if I'm Carter Nelson, and if it's close between schools or whatever, I'm looking at the one school that I know is going to throw the ball to the tight end, is going to feature them, play them. You're going to, even when you're not the starter, you're going to still get a chance to play and develop. Like, that is something that I don't think goes into the thoughts of all these people, and why I've seen, I don't know how many, there's a lot of misses on the tight ends in terms of rankings, a lot of misses. And, certainly some of these guys end up being studs and whatever, But there's a lot of guys that you're like, man, this guy was like a top 50 kid. Why did he do nothing? Well, he probably went to the wrong school. Like that's a lot of it.
What? Holden Stays. He left Notre Dame to go to Tennessee. What Tennessee tight end has done anything ever under Heupel?
I mean, honestly, I don't know, and I can't.
What's that? Jason Witten? Like
yeah, Jason
all,
Witten,
you know, like all the way back to 2000. Like
I mean, I can't. I mean, I haven't studied Heupel's like what happened at UCF or when he was at Mizzou for that couple years or whatever, and like all that. I don't know, right? So I don't know whether or not like that you know, is going to be something where it's like, okay, well, Stays is gonna eat and like this is whatever. Maybe just maybe they have had tight ends, they just haven't had somebody who's gonna say, I don't know, right?
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I'm just looking at kind of like where their offense was, you know, when they had the Hendon Hooker offense, right? And they're just like, they're like screens and chucking it deep. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that's not a tight end friendly offense. That isn't.
right.
It isn't. And that's, you know, they go the hurry up, no huddle, screens and chucking it deep. And I mean, that's just one of those things. And I mean, that's one of the things with, if you look at with their receivers and how they were evaluated, they're like, man, it's really tough to get evaluation on these receivers because these guys don't run any routes. They run goes, they run goes, and then they run hitches. Like that's it, right? So it's like, where does the tight end kind of fit into that? So it's like, is he going to develop there the same way that he would have at Notre Dame? Probably not. But, you know, at the same time, he thinks he's going to get a shine there. So I don't know. If I was, I mean, personally, whatever, it's not like he's asking me, but if I was advising someone like Holden Stays, I'd be like, you need to look at how tight ends have been used and developed within these things, or because everyone always thinks that their talent is going to super it. Well, it's me, man. I'm going to be the guy who's just whatever. It's like, it doesn't always work that way. You can even be that good and it doesn't even matter because they don't care because they run what they run. Right. So, I don't know. And then because of all that too, it's like where we cannot someone could have rated Holden Stays and been like, this guy's a top 100 guy. I think he's going to be a star, whatever. And then he goes undrafted. Then people are going to be like, he was way off. Like, man, what a terrible ranking. And really, it's just, you know, circumstance that played into it, and it could have been different.
Yeah. Blayberg is out here. He makes the point the world runs on rankings in one form or another, which is true, and that's why they do it. I mean, that's fine, right? I'm not even hating on it. It just is what it is. Blayberg's ranking his kids. I want to know the criteria for that, right? Like, oh, my son, you know, it doesn't really know how to read, but the math is off the charts, and so he's ranked higher because the upside of the math, right? The upside of being able to build things.
One guy does his chores all the time.
Does his chores. It's the potential, right? But Blayberg's looking at like, what's the potential of this? You know, my other son is big in the arts. Well, that doesn't pay very well, does it? You know, you're going to be an artist, or what's going on here? So that's stuff. Patrick Carter's ESQ #1 spot for bamboo shirts in Chicago. I mean, fair take
in the USA, man.
In the world,
yeah,
going all over the place.